We got Wayne Banks on the podcast. Wayne is principal in residence at KIPP Team Academy in Newark, New Jersey. And Wayne was also a member at South Loop Strength and Conditioning in Chicago for a while when he lived there. And I've been wanting to have Wayne on the podcast for a little while to talk about education, since I think that teaching people things is one of the hardest possible things to do. And teaching people things while also simultaneously navigating a let's say, challenging situation with the institution of education makes things even more difficult. So been wanting to talk to Wayne about all that stuff, but with the current state of affairs in the world, we ended up talking a lot about what's going on with COVID-19, what's going on with protests in response to George Floyd's killing, and what's been going on with CrossFit, with Greg Glassman making some pretty wild comments online and subsequently resigning, and we'll see what continues to happen with CrossFit HQ. So some elements here of some timely topics, but hopefully relevant long-term, as well as some discussion on the education system. So enjoy this one. All right, Wayne, we're talking in the middle of June for anyone who is potentially coming back and listening to this later. And normally on this podcast, we do stuff that tends to be a little bit more big picture, a little bit more abstract. But given what is going on in the middle of June in 2020, it's probably wildly insensitive and foolish to not be talking about what's currently happening in the world. So a little bit of frame of reference for people. We're sort of coming out of the end of initial lockdowns for COVID-19. We've seen protests sort of sweeping the country in response to George Floyd's killing. For those of the listeners who are involved in the CrossFit community, CrossFit has been having some pretty wild problems recently with the founder and CEO of CrossFit tweeting some racially charged and divisive remarks, and then more and more information coming out about what's been going on at CrossFit HQ, and affiliates are dropping their affiliation. My affiliate dropped our affiliation a little less than a week ago. So lots of stuff happening currently. And Wayne, I had you on my list of podcast guests to talk about education, since you have a lot of interesting thoughts on that and have been working your way up in the education system for a while. But I figured we'd start with, just what's going on. How have you been dealing with all of this crazy stuff that is currently happening?
Hey, Todd. Yeah. First off, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here, and I really appreciate you reaching out. Yeah, I mean, it's been a roller coaster of emotions, as I'm sure it has been for a lot of different people. I think ultimately for me, it's just really been trying to focus on staying grounded and what's really important, trying to balance the responsibilities of work and self-care, making sure that I'm taking care of me, being that so many of these things impact, my day to day. And so, but yeah, I mean, Corona really kind of took me for, like it did, swept the nation and took me all for a surprise. I didn't realize what was actually happening at first. I tested positive for the antibody a couple of weeks ago. And like in early March, like when we went on quarantine for schools, I was starting to think about all of the symptoms and everything that everyone was talking about. And I got really sick back in February and just thought I had the flu. It really kind of took me out for 2 weeks. I was very grateful that one of those weeks I was at home on break from school. But ultimately I was overwhelmed by the thought that maybe I had Corona and didn't realize it, and might have been and then the next week when I felt better, my fever broke and things like that, I was going to school, but I still had a minor cough. I still had my voice was messed up, and didn't realize that I was possibly bringing other people into harm's way and danger of contracting the virus. And
yeah, you're a vector for disease.
yeah. I mean,
I've been saying that for a while about you.
I can't help it. I just very attractive to so many people. No, but like just walking through the hallway and engaging with teachers. I'm a big hugger, and so like didn't even realize that like I might have been passing it along. And so when I did realize like, oh, all of these symptoms are kind of lining up, I was like kind of shocked and really really scared for a bit. And then once I like realized that once I got the antibody test and things like that, I mean, it really has impacted on like wearing your mask. Like I always do like a pocket check, a wallet check, keys check, and everything like that. Wearing your mask on the way out when you're not used to it, let's say really difficult, especially in New York City, where it's like the epicenter of like the virus, and here in the United States, and so it was really overwhelming. And then also like it really had an impact on school, obviously, leading schools here in Jersey. Like the impact on my kids and the impact on their families, the impact on my staff, and then like trying to take everything that we had built for in-person school and putting it completely in a remote space. What are the responsibilities of everyone? How do we communicate with parents and families? How do we communicate with our kids? What does instruction look like? How do we evaluate instruction? How do we evaluate the progress of our children? Has been like, it was really, really overwhelming for a while. And I'm a person who like really, really thrives off of structure. So like work provides structure for me. Sports and like working out, that kind of stuff, like really provided structure for me. So I felt like, really lost at first, of trying to understand like, how am I going to make sure that I'm getting all the things and showing up as much as I can for the people who need me, but also like making sure I'm taking care of myself. So, I feel like I finally got a hold of it, maybe about a month ago, but it took a while to like create structure for myself and to manage and navigate as a leader, for the people who need me the most.
So for the gym, we were in a somewhat similar position of suddenly having to force everything online, right? But having people do optional exercise classes in an online setting is totally different than having to move children's education online without really being prepared to do that. So for us, obviously a somewhat similar situation of just kind of having to, use the startup analogy of building an airplane on the way down. We were like, okay, like we don't know what's happening. We're already falling. Let's just start throwing stuff at the wall and seeing what sticks and just kind of adjusting on the fly. And, the stakes are much, much lower for us. But I'm curious to know what were some of the biggest things that you learned about the education system and how to effectively educate children based upon having to suddenly change the way it was being done?
Well, I mean, it was a lesson that I've always known, and it just like really highlighted how real it is that money is king. So like my network, KIPP New Jersey, we have a pretty big budget, and we've been able to do a lot for our kids because being a charter school network, we receive money from the state, but also we have a really, really strong fundraising donation pool of money that comes in every year, and that has allowed us to have the facilities, the resources, such as like my building, for instance, is 1-to-1 in terms of computers and technology. So every child in every class has access to a Google Chromebook. So what is the first thing that we did is we knew that the children needed tech at home. So we gave out all of our computers to the 4,000 or 5,000 kids in our network that needed technology. And so how were we able to do that? Because we had the money to buy, Google Chromebooks every year until each building was 1-to-1 for our kids, which definitely made it more gave us the capability to be able to continue to have instruction in a way that we might have had it in person. And so there was a lot of asynchronous learning. Originally when we first went on quarantine, we didn't even think we were going to be out for as long as we were, or have been. At first they were saying like, oh, we're going to do this for the next 2 weeks. And so we created a packet of work for math, ELA, social studies, and science. And it was like, here, take this work. We'll be back in a couple weeks. No big deal. Get it done. And we'll see you soon. And then it was like, oh, we're not coming back March 30th. We're coming back April 20th. So what does school look like now that we're not going to come back for another 3 weeks? And then April 20th came, and so on and so forth. And because we have the resources, the resources, the central office, all of those things to be able to say like, this is how this engine is going to run, and then using the autonomy of schools, and then the brilliant minds that like I get to work with every single day to really design and build the ship as we're sailing it has been, I'm really grateful for what we've been able to provide for our kids, but also like disheartened and like completely, saddened by the reality that like this is what we did for our kids yesterday was the last day of school. What we did for our kids in the last 2.5 months of school is not happening every place across the country, and so like it completely highlights and exacerbates this. What Corona has completely highlighted and exacerbated the disproportionate, treatment of communities of color, specifically in the education space, and how can we provide equity across the nation for all of our schools, so.
Yeah, there was a recent Wall Street Journal article talking about the challenges and frankly failures of online education that have come out based upon the COVID situation, right? Where we obviously think of school as like, okay, cool, you got to go and you got to do your learning, and it just sort of take it for granted what happens when kids step into a school building. When you take that away, like you mentioned, kids don't necessarily have access to technology, right? You're in a fortunate situation where you are able to actually provide children with, laptops or iPads or whatever they need to actually even partake in online learning environments. But then the other aspect of it too is just the structure, right? That if you go into a school building, you have your classes and you go from place to place. And a lot of kids are in situations at home where that structure isn't an option. And it's not just because they lack discipline or because the parents lack discipline or, whatever, which is kind of the probably knee-jerk reaction to that. It's a much more complicated systemic issue of like, okay, well, how are you going to set aside time to sit down with your iPad at this exact time for your Zoom call when your parents you're potentially in a single parent household, your parent has to, do something with work at that time. You have younger children who are relying on you as the older sibling to take care of them. And there's just so many things that are potentially impacting the ability of students to even engage in the first place.
Yeah. I mean, and that's the thing is like, back to the idea of discipline, how much discipline, my building is a 5 through 8 school for middle school. Like, how much discipline do you actually expect a 10-year-old to have? Like, that's ridiculous. You know what I'm saying? Like, I was thinking about my experience as a 10-year-old and, someone who came from a 2-parent household and who came home and did his homework every day. But I don't know how I would have, thrived in this space of creating structure for myself. I mean, that's one of the biggest difficulties of students who are 18, 19 years old who go to college. Right? Creating a structure for themselves that is going to allow them to be successful and achieve the academics, results that they're looking for. That's going to make them competitive in this world. And so, that's what I had to remind my staff is like, while a student may not be having may not even be living in a traumatic household, like maybe they do have both parents, but both their parents are still they're essential workers and they're still working, and like they have to wake up and go to their aunt's house, and their aunt has someone that they don't know at the house, and then like you said, they might have siblings. I know a couple of kids who do have 3 or 4 siblings who are younger than them and are expected to support and help them and make sure that they all are doing their work together. And so we've really just it's really taught me a lot about like patience, how to instill in patience in others, generosity and grace. Because that's the only way that we can navigate this unprecedented time. Like it's difficult to make assumptions about what's happening why a child is not doing their work, or why a parent is not responding, or even when a parent is responding and why they're so heated and upset. It's like, really understanding that no one is working from a place of malice here. No one wakes up and says like, I'm just like not going to do my work today because I don't want to. It's like there are so many other compounding factors that are impacting our kids and their families and the communities that we really have to figure out how we can redesign the system to support them in a way that's going to achieve the academic results we need to achieve for kids.
Yeah, and like we said, you're in a situation of a charter network that has resources, right? You are essentially able to have some sort of filter in terms of what kids are even participating, right? That the kids who are going to participate in your network are coming from households that value education enough to say, you know what, we're gonna seek out one of the more, let's say, notoriously disciplined charter networks to even participate in. So it's already a select group of people that have resources, and there's a lot of challenges in that situation to make something like this work. So what needs to be done? Let's say we are in a situation where kids aren't going back to school under normal circumstances in the fall. What needs to be done to make this type of situation work better?
Whew, that's tough. I mean, I think that the first thing is we have to figure out, one, how do we motivate children? I think about like whenever we're planning, it's like, what are the mindsets that are necessary, right? And I think the mindset is, how do we really build investment in areas where investment may not already exist? How do we build investment in children so that they recognize and take full ownership of their education and what they have to do every single day to achieve where they want to go? That's the first thing. And I also think, I think it really calls upon some of the biggest businesses, tech companies, things like that, like Google and Amazon and all these other people who have a deep hand in education to really support communities where technology is not as readily available for kids every day. I mean, there are schools now where kids don't touch a computer at all in person. And so I think like us really thinking about how we can really expand and get resources to the communities that need them the most, it's the first step. Because when that happens, when kids have access, the adults have access in a way to be able to progress monitor. I mean, not even just on the kid end, for us, we have online access to all of these different education platforms that allow us to give exams remotely, that allow us to track and monitor student progress, even attendance and things like that, that allows us to have all of their information in one space and updated and create an opportunity for our teachers to be able to respond proactively and reactively when our children need it. And so it really requires the ed tech space to continue to grow, but also extend the resources to the communities that need it the most. I think that's the first piece. Second piece is we really have to reevaluate what education is here in the country, right? I think that we get pigeonholed into education continues to go through this oscillation between new age and modern ways of teaching, and we oftentimes forget about the things that still work and what children need in order to be successful. And some of those things are just the basic foundations of what they need every single day. Structure and also the type of education that they need to make them successful in this new world, right? For instance, we have to get rid of, I'm not the biggest believer in teaching, specific skills to kids. It's about teaching content, leading with content for kids. Why are we not pushing computer science more in elementary school and middle school and things like that?
Can I interrupt you quickly and just ask for a clarification on that? So what do you mean by leading with content?
Yeah. So for instance, a lot of right now we're in a space where it's there are skills that direct the content that we teach. So for instance, for ELA, for English language arts, we teach children how to find the theme within a story, right? As opposed to using the story to teach theme. It's the backwards, right? It's this is how you find theme, as opposed to I'm going to put all of these resources in front of you. You're going to learn about the civil rights movement. You're going to read Malcolm X's speech, and then you're going to talk about what are some of the trends that you notice about what is he talking about. Really teaching kids just the fundamentals of how to read and understand text, as opposed to this is how you pull out the theme, and this is how you talk about the author's perspective. I didn't didn't know anything about the author's perspective until I got into education, right? Like, but it was something I always knew how to do because I was taught through content, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. That there's, you can have this sort of like abstract thing that you're trying to teach children to do. And if they don't understand, or if they don't have any engagement with the actual content that they're working on, they can sort of memorize the pattern of how to do this abstract thing without being able to contextualize.
Absolutely. That's exactly right.
Right. And you know, sort of a classic criticism of the way we do education is the idea of, okay, if you were going to learn to ride a bike the way that children are taught to ride bikes, you'd have, you know, textbooks about like torque and how chains are designed, and you know, like the physics of rotation and how to potentially calculate some mathematics related to the way that wheels spin. And you might understand like the history of the bicycle and like who first came up with the idea and all that stuff. And then, you know, you go through a few years of that and it's like, all right, cool. Now here's your bicycle. Go ahead and ride it. And you know, it's
everyone falls over. Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. I mean, and then no one can ride a bike. That's exactly what's happening, right, in education. It's like, and so like this wave of like getting kids to learn by doing, which also becomes really difficult in a remote space, right? Like, I mean, I'm gonna be honest, like as a school leader now, like I just don't know what exactly that's going to look like. Do we have more classes outside, and do we do more things where we bring kids together for a brief moment of learning and then they go back to their remote spaces to you know, really analyze and bring things together? It's like, how do you get kids to learn on their own? That's essentially what we're up against now, right? In this remote space, until we get a vaccine, I imagine that there's going to be this back and forth toggle between being in person and learning, and then also being in a remote space and learning. And so we really have to figure out, how do we get kids to guide their own learning outside of school, and create more real life experiences for kids to be able to like to make it sticky for children to want to be invested and want to learn about these things in a way that's going to invest them and make them like, you know, be better for themselves. So it's difficult. It's definitely difficult. Don't have the answers, but we've learned a lot about like, you know, how to administer instruction online and things like that. But if there's anything that I've learned as a leader, is just that like, you know, you have to lead with patience and generosity. And there's also, we got to figure out how we can extend and expand resources to the communities that need them the most. Otherwise, those communities will continue to fall behind. Black children, brown children will continue to receive the short end of the stick in terms of where education is going in the future.
Yeah, I think the idea of, I don't know what the right word is, but let's say empowering children to learn on their own, that's super, super interesting. And I imagine unbelievably difficult, right? That if you, you know, I have some familiarity with online courses and the way that people create online courses. And, you know, you just see like ghastly completion rates for these things, right? That the number of people who are able to complete a course, even one that they potentially paid thousands of dollars for, and actually want the information on, you know, that they just don't get it done. And that there's only a small percentage of people who have the resources available, the disposition to learn on their own online, you know, the sort of like you said before, the tendency to create structure surrounding learning to actually get something like that done. It's just every layer of the problem, from, you know, do you have the resources to do this, to are you able to just consistently carve out time to do it on your own, given everything else everyone has going on. Like every layer of that is an unbelievably hard problem.
Yeah, and that's where my network is right now, is like thinking about how do we plan for that. I mean, it's a struggle because right now we're planning for this like middle space of, like I said, the toggle between like being in person for a couple of days with half the kids, and then sanitizing the building for a day, and then the following next 2 days is the other half of children. And you know, I'd rather live in a space where I'm just like really trying to figure this out, where we can figure out how kids can learn remotely at a very high bar, something even closely, you know, similar to or equivalent to what they were learning in school, at the rate that they were learning in school, with the structures that we were able to provide for them. I'd really rather figure that out now than to plan for this middle space. I feel like we were just spending more brain space on like the middle ground, trying to figure out what instruction is going to look like in person, being that we do need to be remote half of the time. because we're going to live in this reality for a while. Corona isn't going anywhere. And I think that's like my biggest frustration with like people's response to this is I feel like a lot of people are in a space where like Corona is just going to disappear one day, or one day soon. Right. And it's like, it's not going anywhere. And we really need to spend time figuring out and planning like what a remote space can look like at a very high bar for kids. And I feel like we haven't been doing it. Like my network has been doing that. But because like governors and policy want people to get back to some state of normalcy, I want that too. But I also know that like, given that every year, every so often, this is something that happens where some new virus, some new disease comes through and, attacks the population. And so until we get to a space where we do have a vaccine, this is the reality of what we're dealing with right now is not going anywhere.
Yeah, I think I've seen some similar, I think improperly calibrated predictions about what the future is going to look like, right? And I've seen some folks out there saying a lot of stuff where it's like, if you really think about what's going to happen, we're not just going to go back to the way things were in January 2020, right? That's not happening anytime soon. That, we will achieve some sort of, to use such a cliched phrase, new normal. But to your point, right? It's like, okay, what does that mean? Does that mean that you have thousands of kids coming in and out of the same school building every single day, going on buses of, dozens of kids, and people are in a gym class with dozens of kids, like playing basketball together or whatever? Like, probably not. Are kids going to go back to school? Yeah, they almost certainly are. But what is that actually going to look like, right? Are people going to go back to office buildings? Yeah, they almost certainly are. But, if you can only have a certain number of people on the elevators at any given time, how are you going to get the 5,000 people who need to work in this building into their offices between the hours of 7 and 9 a.m.? It'll take you all day just to do that. Like, what are we actually going to do?
Yeah, and I mean the CDC guidelines around how to like go back to school, it's crazy. I mean, I want to go back. Like I said, I want to go back to school and be able to give the rigorous instruction that my building's been able to do, that my network's been able to achieve with kids. And I mean, everyone wants that, but the reality is that we can't. And the guidelines around what it'll look like when we go back to school, that has like a detrimental effect on the learning environment. I mean, our building, really thrives on like relationships with kids. You will see teachers like hugging children, like, kissing kids on the forehead as they walk in. Is
that legal?
I mean, within our network, it is. But yeah, it's like really the relationships that we have in the building where every child feels loved and honored and celebrated in our building. That's like a part of our vision. And not being able to do that, I mean, I can't imagine not being able to hug my kids when they walk in the breakfast line, and it's like I got to keep 6 feet away from them. Everyone has a mask on, and teachers are trying to give instruction with children with masks on with muffled sounds, and kids in middle school like to make sounds anyway. So we're trying to manage the classroom and things like that. Kids having to sit on buses with plastic between them. I mean, a lot of people talk about the school to prison pipeline and policing of bodies within schools and things like that, within charter schools specifically. I mean, the level of policing that we have to do with the guidelines by the CDC to be able to go back to school is like not a space that I want to live. It's not fair for kids. It's like, and then also like the fear of like parents that they have for sending their children back to school and potentially exposing themselves. Not only children, but also my staff. They might have an elder in their house that they take care of every day. And so like going back to work is also a point of stress. So really thinking about like, until we get to a place where we have a vaccine and we can like wipe the virus out, like, there are so many layers to the decision around going back to school and the threat that it potentially has on the livelihood of so many other people, kids, my staff and their families,
Yeah, totally. So you talked a little bit about this idea of some sort of like hybrid online in-person learning environment. And given that you've just had to jump into this online learning environment without a lot of preparation, what, if anything, have you learned from doing this online form of schooling that you think could be applicable to actually teaching people in person?
I mean, I think mainly that high expectations for any space is like number one, right? Having high expectations for kids. I mean, we just communicated to families like this is what we expect during online learning, and it's the same things that we expect when we're in school. We expect you to be focused and paying attention and sitting up and all the things that that we stress every day in school. As far as teaching in person goes from the remote space, I think it also just speaks to the power of technology. I think we also underestimate how much technology can be used to enhance education. And so we don't need paper to teach, right? All of our homework is online, which is because it's been forced. I mean, a lot of our homework was online to begin with, and so I'm grateful that we had the platforms that we already had in place. But like Google Classroom and like Khan Academy, all these other free resources and things like that, no red ink, right? All of these things that we use to teach children, and so it doesn't need to be someone standing in front of children and giving them some kind of packet or paper to invest them in the work. That stuff can be online and can be really impactful on the environment, where we're not spending thousands and thousands of dollars on paper to give to kids. As far as it's also thinking about the adult learning space. We thrive in a world where my network is really focused on coaching people to their best self, to be their highest selves, specifically around the work that we do with kids every single day. And that's difficult now because so much of a relationship is built in person. Even if it's just a high five in the hallway or, hey, how's your baby doing? And now it's different because you're looking at someone through a screen and you don't get that in-person connection. So really trying to still figure that out too, of how we can continue to build relationships with people. But if there's anything, it's taught me that the relationships for teaching individuals is key, because I think we were able to achieve so much in our building because of the relationships that we have with kids, because of the relationships we have with one another. That was the foundation by which we were able to move to this remote space and still hold a very high bar for staff interaction, staff responsibilities and expectations, but also responsibilities and expectations for kids. And so I think the power of relationships is super important. There's a book Malcolm Gladwell's book, Talking to Strangers, right? It talks a lot about how we build relationships with one another, and it's a really good read. And really, his thought made me think about this remote space of how can we transfer the in-person connection to a remote over technology kind of connection that builds relationships in a very authentic way still.
Yeah, so it sounds like you're talking about the idea of having really strong relationships with people then enables you to hold them accountable and have high expectations, right? And this idea of having high expectations is something that I think that most people are like, yeah, that sounds good. We should have high expectations of each other. But I think that that's something that's a little bit abstract and maybe difficult to really parse out. Okay, what does that actually mean? So what does that mean? What does it mean for you to have high expectations of kids in a remote learning environment or in an in-person learning environment?
I think, one, believing what a person can achieve and that there's really no limit to that. And so obviously you have to have the checks and balances of is this too challenging? Is this too rigorous to put in front of kids or to ask an adult to do? But you get a good sense of that checks and balances situation or parameter is created by the relationship that you have with someone. The better you know them, the better you know what they want to achieve, what they're about, what their purpose is, why they are here, and the capacity of what they can handle. And so it's also about the true having high expectations also comes from a deep place of love. I love the people in my building so much, and not some kind of fake kind of love where I'm just saying it to you. It's I'm going to love you in a way that allows me to hold you accountable to the things that we agreed upon together. We came to an agreement on how we were going to talk to one another, how we're going to engage with one another, and the work that we're going to do. And so it's really been nice to see how those relationships that my staff we're able to create in person has had an impact on the work and what we've been able to achieve with kids and with one another in this remote space. So we talk about, holding their feet to the fire, right? That's part of having high expectations of like, I'm going to give you the feedback around the things that you need to improve on, celebrate the things that you're winning at as well. But also like, hold your feet to the fire when you're not meeting those expectations. I'm going to tell you in a very supportive way and support you towards being better. My thing also a lot of the time is just like understanding, like always making the assumption that like no one is coming for me from a place of malice, right? Everyone has the best intentions. We're all responsible for our intentions and our impact. So I'm not going to excuse, if someone has good intentions and then it doesn't land very well, but it's also my job as a leader to like communicate that and to be aware of my impact on others, and understand that like, no one wakes up every morning and say like, I want to be bad at my job. No child wakes up to that every morning and be like, I'm going to fail all my classes in school, right? And so when I think about that, then it takes me to another place of like, okay, so what is getting in the way of this person being able to meet the expectations that we've agreed on together? And then how can I speak to them in a way, understanding what their values are and who they are as a person that's going to motivate them and inspire them to be their best selves? Because, that's the place of like true coaching, and that's the place of really holding high expectations for people, is being able to see their highest self all of the time, no matter what is happening in the engagement that you're having with them.
Do you have an example of holding someone's feet to the fire?
Yeah, I mean,
you don't have to name names. We don't have to publicly.
Absolutely. I mean, so our entire like attendance system was taken online, right? And so like Google Classroom is the way that we take attendance. Kids wake up every morning and there's a question of the day that is posted for them to make a response to. It's like, what's your favorite color? Or like, if you could sit down and have lunch with some prominent figure from the past, who would it be and why? And kids have to answer that question. They have to answer the question by 10 o'clock. At 10:01, the two secretaries at our building start going through the Google Classroom and figuring out which kids you can see on there, like who responded and who has not responded. And they start making phone calls to parents. I had to design that system of attendance and how that was going to be with my team. I had to do that and like really give the responsibility to different people in my building of like, hey, this is what the system is going to look like. This is when this needs to happen. And so because I had to like make sure as we were getting the system off the ground, there were like deadlines and expectations around like when the questions were going to be posted or scheduled and things like that. And there were a couple people that I was like managing who like, missed those deadlines. Right. And so again, as a leader, it's like this person they didn't wake up and say, I'm not doing the question of the day. I'm not going to post that, right? I'm not going to have these questions posted by Friday at 5 p.m. for the following week. And so like as a leader, my thing is it's like, okay, they didn't intend to do that. It's my job to, hey, this is missing. What's going on? Can I help you with anything? And most of the time the response is like, yo, I forgot. I'm so sorry. Like that was the deadline, because everything was new for everyone. And so like, because everything was new, it's like building a habit around like when things need to be posted and how often and the cadence of like progress monitoring those things. And so the follow-up of accountability was difficult at times, but I also named for those people. Like I would have been a bad leader had I just like kept tally of the times that they missed it, didn't say anything, fixed it for them. And then at the end of the year, on the end of the year evaluation, and you missed these deadlines 5 or 6 different times, and I never said anything to them about it, right? And that's just not fair. So,
yeah.
I holding their feet to the fire is like, hey, you missed this deadline. How can I support you? What's happening? And then like, okay, so I just don't want this to be a trend. And so I know that you value like making sure all of your work, you value making sure all of your work is done. You value being there on time for kids. And I just want to make sure that you can reach that expectation for yourself. What are you going to do next time to make sure that this isn't the case? Or how can I support you next time to make sure that you meet this deadline? And a lot of times people are like, hey, if you can send me a text reminder on Thursday, that'd be helpful. Yep. Got you. And so, living in a space of support, and a place of like, servitude. As a leader, you're serving the people that you coach and manage. It's not you telling them what to do. Is you serve them in a way that helps them to be better every day and get better every day. That's your role as the leader. That's like a perfect example of like holding someone's feet to the fire.
Yeah, I think that's super insightful because it's, again, the abstract idea of like, hold people accountable and, hold their feet to the fire, but do it from a place of servitude. Like that all sounds good, but what does it actually mean? It means that you have something that's kind of a bright line of like, hey, here's the actual thing that you need to do at this exact time. And if it's not done, I'm going to have a conversation with you immediately in a non-accusatory way and figure out what's going on rather than waiting until it's become a pattern and I'm mad about it. And then, everyone's upset because you're upset because it hasn't been done for a while. And the person's upset because they're like, dude, if you just told me like 4 weeks ago, we could have done something about this. Like, what's going on here?
Yeah, I mean, there's a book called Radical Candor, and like that was one of the main examples that she used. Is like, I was managing this person, and like they had missed the deadline so many times, or like just weren't doing their job very well, and then I fired them. And then the conversation, the person was asking like why, and it was in that moment that the author realized is like I never said anything to them about why or like the times that they did not do their job well. And the person was like, if you would have just told me that this is what you actually wanted, I would have done it. And the person left disgruntled. I don't want anybody that I'm leading to feel like I didn't do my job as their leader to like coach them and help them to be better. Like that's the job of a leader, right? Like you are the support of the people that are in front on the front lines, right? To make them better for the people that they serve. And it's so beautiful it's like so much more fulfilling to see someone grow and develop and for them to be able to see their growth because you continuously pushed them along, gave them the feedback. Nope, this isn't right, but here's how I'm going to support you. Nope, this isn't right, but here's how I'm going to support you. Until you're like, okay, yep, I've done everything that I can to support you. And maybe this isn't just a good place or a good fit for you, but, or it's like, yes, I've done everything I can do to support you. And like, you like really have grown and developed a lot. It's really beautiful to see that way other than just being like, you're not doing your job. Goodbye.
Yeah, and I imagine there's a similar process for trying to hold children accountable, right? That kids who are learning, that teachers need to take a similar approach to, if a student doesn't do their homework or if a student is underachieving relative to what the teacher perceives their potential to be, or if a student is acting out in class, right? That the sort of classic disciplinarian stuff isn't necessarily the most effective. Like, yeah, there's probably a time and place to just be like, yo, that's completely unacceptable and there's consequences for that action. But this more nuanced way of managing people is probably effective for children too. And I imagine that's very difficult to teach. So how do you try to impart that wisdom to the teachers?
Yeah, I mean, it always starts with the vision of what we believe about our kids is that kids come to us excellent. Right? It's not like we make them excellent. They come to us with a story that is valuable, experiences that are valuable, that contribute to their learning experience and how they see the world. And that brings a lot of value to our experience. And so it's our teacher's job. We impart that knowledge. It's your job to get to know who your kids are and what they value and what's important to them. And then it's also just a consistent reminder. Once you have the vision and you're like, you have agreed to this vision for being a part of this building, and this is how we navigate. This is how we work with kids. We love them, right? And what does that love actually look like? It looks like when they do make a mistake, you hold them accountable. You don't assume that like, hey, they woke up. No kid is going to wake up every day again and say, I'm going to go to this person's class and throw a pencil today. Or I'm going to go to this person's class and I didn't do my home. Like, I'm not going to do their homework tonight. Now, sometimes, kids make silly decisions, but kids are actually kids. It's reminding them who they are.
I would actually at least slightly dispute that from my own personal experience. I think there were definitely days that I woke up with the intention of causing a problem in high school.
Oh, goodness. And still, if that was the case, as your teacher, and don't get me wrong, I do have some kids. It's hard. I do have some kids where I'm just like, yes, I don't like you very much, and you don't like me very much. And we're going to sit here and be miserable together in this classroom, though. And you're going to learn this. And we're just going to battle it out until the end of the year. That definitely happens. But the overarching mindset is that children in general are children. So we've done a lot of work with like understanding, like, if you're in fifth grade, you're 10 years old. And so what is the psychology of a 10-year-old? There is a book out there called Yardsticks, and it really talks about like what fifth graders really care about. And then the progression to sixth grade. Like sixth grade is where kids really start having their own opinions and become argumentative. They stop caring about what like pleasing adults, and they start caring about pleasing their friends. And so how does that impact the learning environment while they're at school and the decisions that they make? And so our staff is very well versed in that. And so by knowing the child, and that in your 12-year-old brain and your 13-year-old brain, this is how you're seeing the world, I can now, because I know better, I can do better to navigate that space of when an expectation isn't met. How to truly show that I do love you, and that I'm going to forgive the mistake that you make, and also support you to make better decisions in the future. And so like doing the self work of understanding, I mean, it always starts with self. What do you know about yourself? What are your triggers? What's the baggage that you bring to the space? By understanding that, understanding what children are bringing to the space, you can, when a trigger happens, when a stimulus happens, you can create more space for yourself as a teacher to create the best response that's going to support that child to be better. There's a really nice quote that talks about that, of like, between every, there's a stimulus, and between the stimulus and the response is a space where we have the power to decide. And so it's like really doing the self work with teachers and creating a vision that allows them to make that space longer, so that they have time to be better for kids and make a better decision.
Yeah, that's super insightful. It's not just about understanding what's going on and what the big picture is and what the vision is. It's also about being able to control your own emotional reaction in the moment in order to be able to execute on that bigger picture.
Yeah, we talk a lot about not being, what is it? You're like the thermostat in the room, right? Like, you control the thermostat, you control the temperature in the room. Right. And, ultimately being emotionally constant is so important. And I'm not a parent, but like, it speaks a lot to like how my parents raised me. It was like, yeah, I did things wrong all the time. And I think like even as educators, we forget that, as a child, you did some crazy stuff too. Everyone did, right? Parents had to tell you every day to make your bed. Parents had to tell you every day, a lot of the time, to do different things that were necessary, the expectations that they had for you. And yet they still told you, and yet they still loved on you and supported you. And so it's like super important that we extend that same grace in the education space. It's even more important because learning is difficult. I mean, especially in middle school is such a weird time. And so like we definitely have to live in a space of grace and generosity for kids.
Yeah, totally. So we've been talking a lot about just the education system, the challenges in teaching children in the best of times, let alone when you're suddenly forced into online learning without even really having a plan in place. And, we sort of danced around the idea of, systemic inequality. Like what do the inequalities look like in the education system, and then just like systems across the entire country and across the entire world, which are really being exposed right now in sort of the wake of the killing of George Floyd and some of the protests that have popped up in response to that. And I think that for a lot of people, this is potentially the first time they're really seeing some of this stuff and thinking about it. And for a lot of other people, it's sort of like okay, well, this has been going on forever. What is actually different right now? And not even necessarily from a place of negativity, but just like, I've been waiting for something like this to happen for so long, and this is crazy that this is actually happening in this moment. So, I mean, I'm just curious to get your take on what you actually think is going on, just in terms of people being exposed to these systemic inequalities, recognizing them. Why is there a tipping point right now? What is your personal experience with all of that? I'll just sort of let you speak on that.
Yeah, it's also very difficult to speak on for me as a proud Black gay man, there's like the intersectionality of like so many of my identities being on full exposure at this point. But it's also like one of those things where it's like overwhelming in a way of like, wow, this is crazy that I'm living through this and living through history taking place. I mean, I think Corona has been, unfortunately, has taken a lot of lives, but it's what I feel like the world, specifically the United States, needed. It really made fertile ground for something like police brutality to be responded to in the way that it is right now. I feel like, someone, my partner was sharing with me about how Corona has taught a lot of people about the fragility of life and how quickly it can be taken. And so because of the issues around police brutality and how George Floyd lost his life, I mean, this is nothing new, but at the same time, I feel like the world was on pause for so long and realized, wow, that could have been me, or like this is absolutely wrong. This person is losing their life for no reason. That if a white person was in the same position, this just like would not happen and hasn't been happening. And so because we were on pause, it's been able to really, I guess, highlight the police brutality that's been happening for years and years and years. And so for me, like when it first happened with George Floyd, whenever it happens, whenever, a story around a Black man or a Black woman or a Black trans woman or a Black trans man, a life is taken, I always struggle at the beginning because, one, I'm an empathic person, and so I have to guard myself against watching the video stream following on my Instagram, on my Facebook, and things like that. Anytime it happens, I don't watch it. I can't. It's like a matter of self-preservation. Reading the story enough that's enough. That's all that I need. And but I'm also grateful that the response has been what it has been. Yes, long overdue. I mean, this dates back way before. I mean, it's Pride Month right now, and Marsha P. Johnson was the start of the Stonewall riots here in New York City back in 1969. And what was she fighting against as a Black trans woman? Police brutality against the queer Black community. And it's so.
Can you just give a quick background on the Stonewall riots, because that's an important history point.
Yeah. So Marsha P. Johnson was a trans woman. If you have not watched on Netflix the life and death of Marsha P. Johnson, it is on there now, and it's super important. It's a great a great documentary of her life. But yeah, I mean, police brutality in the 60s was at an all-time high, specifically around the civil rights movement. And at Stonewall, Marsha P. Johnson stood up to fight against the police in the way that Black trans women's lives were being taken. And we talk about the sexuality has always been in the closet and not really like talked about. But some of the same police that were mistreating Black trans women and Black queer people in general, some of the same people were engaging with them behind closed doors. And so she really stood up and fought against that. And it started the Stonewall riots in 1969 that eventually led to, June being Pride Month and the celebration of the LGBTQ community achieving basic human rights that we all deserve. And so I think ultimately what the people that were left out of the people that were often left out of, gay rights are people of color, Black people. And we still aren't treated the same, as our white queer counterparts. And so being that it is the Black Lives Matter movement right now, that's really taking hold of the country. We can't forget that this started way back, right? You cannot you cannot dissociate the power of, you cannot dissociate history in terms of like Black Lives Matter movement being for Black people is for all Black people, including Black trans women. Specifically, I mean, I learned a stat the other day that the average life expectancy of a Black trans woman is 35 years old in this country, when the life expectancy in general for this country is like 74 or 75. Like, that is crazy. And it's like barely been difficult as a Black gay man to see, the Black community, a lot of folks not include Black trans women and Black queer people as a part of this fight for Black Lives Matter. And it's really upsetting, because as a queer man, you fight this is that intersectionality that I was talking about. Like, you're fighting like the racism piece, and then you're also fighting the sexuality piece. Not being accepted by the community because you're Black, and also not being accepted by the Black community because you're gay. And then also, like, as a Black trans women out here aren't accepted because they're different. Like, just like literally a matter of difference. And no one understands what that's like, to not be accepted by the broader community, by the broader United States, but also not within your own community. And so we really have to rally together to understand that this fight for a fight against police brutality is not just one side. It's not just about Black cisgendered men and women, straight men and women. It's about everyone, including the lives of Black queer folks altogether. And so, with the recent responses by the protests, I've been really overwhelmed by the white allies in my life. In 2016, when Trump was elected president, I really had to I really went through my friend list and was like, yep, this is a white person I don't trust. Yep, this is a white person that I don't trust. Your in the middle stance around, if you can't see how this man is diametrically opposed to who I am as a person, and my livelihood in the United States, and not even just like him in general, just like who he empowers by being in power. If you can't see that, I'm sorry, we just can't be friends, because our friendship is a trigger for me, and it's a trigger for anybody who I call, who sees me as a leader, and I can't be a fraud. I need to be authentic, and in my authenticity of showing up as a very proud Black gay man, I can't be friends with you. I can't be associated with you, because it's a matter of self-preservation, because you don't really see me for who I am, and so the white people that I've kept in my life have just extended themselves in ways that that they've extended themselves before, but even more now, that has been overwhelmingly positive and supportive of me as a Black gay man, to the point where it's brought me to tears so many times to see so many people stand up with me and on my behalf. The text messages and things like that. But there's also the feeling of exhaustion, right? Of at the same time, white people are so right now have responded in a way that I've never seen it before. That's exhausting for a lot of people to reach out and say how can I be better? How can I be better? How can I be better? And I really try to hold space for. I'm a person who really tries to hold space for that, because I know a lot of my Black friends who are just exhausted by that. I'm figure it out for yourself. I've done the work. It's time for you to do the work. For me, it's it takes so many different lines of effort from us. And I will always hold space for white people who want to reach out and ask me what they can do better as an ally, how can they be more supportive in this space, and so but it's also exhausting as an individual to be this is what you can do and this is what you can do, and read up on this and watch this, and because part of my self-actualization as I wasn't just born a proud Black gay man. I did the work to figure out and to see myself, and to understand what I stand for, I did a lot of the reading that white people need to do to be able to, because I had to strip myself of my own internalized racism, my own internalized homophobia, in order to realize my most authentic self, and how I stand and as a leader, how I stand as a friend, how I stand as a partner, right? And so all of these things are super critical to this fight against, but this fight for a better and more beautiful place of equity and equality within the country.
So if you want a spot to point people to in the future when they ask, what should I do? How can I be better? What should they do? How can they be better?
Yeah. I mean, I think that the first thing is that you need to do the work. You need to do your research. You need to do your homework. Nothing is going to take the place of understanding how the system has been intentionally created to oppress Black people, to oppress people of color, right? But specifically Black people. I want people to realize that like this country was built on the backs of Black people, and it really causes someone. You really need to understand from all the way from slavery to now, the progression of how strategically the system was created to keep Black people in check, to make them feel like second-class, third-class citizens of this country. And so the first place I would direct people to start is, there's a great documentary on Netflix called the 13th Amendment, and talking about how when slavery was ended, right? Everyone, I was taught like, oh, the 13th Amendment, this is amazing. Slavery ended. But the clause in the 13th Amendment is that no one can be held as a slave unless they are imprisoned. And so that loophole alone gave white people the motivation to attack free Black individuals so that they can keep them in slavery. And so in slavery by being in jail. And that has created the system that we are in right now. Why have the police always attacked Black people disproportionately? It's because they wanted to continue to control them, because they have always had control over us in this country because we were brought here as slaves. And so like understanding how the system has been designed to disproportionately keep Black people down is super important. So I would say do the research, and 13th is a great place to start. And that is a trampoline that like, once you start doing that, it'll trampoline you into like so many different areas of understanding the systemic inequalities within this country.
Yeah. And I think that's something that can be confusing for people or challenging for people potentially if they're being exposed to some of these ideas for the first time, right? Is that they're, they don't feel like they're racist, right? It's like, I don't support Jim Crow laws, I don't think I look at Black people and think negatively about them. The classic, I have Black friends, quote unquote, right? And that people are sort of like taken aback where they're like, I'm not actively racist, but the issue isn't necessarily people being actively racist. Like, yes, that is an actual problem, but that there's layers going on in the systems that have been created that result in these kinds of outcomes. That doesn't mean that, like, yes, you individual white person like are voting for the reestablishment of Jim Crow laws. It's something much more complicated than that.
Yeah, I mean, racism today, I think, is even more dangerous than it was in the past. Like, there's an insidious nature to racism within our country, and white people get the privilege of turning a blind eye to racism and how it lives out in this country. And I think that now it's being exposed of like, oh wow, and it's not about like not being racist. It's like, or not being like overtly racist, not spitting in a Black person's face or like beating them because they're Black, like, or forcing Black people not to be able to like use the same drinking fountain as you. Like, yeah, those are all obvious examples of racism, but it's like who you vote for and what they stand for and the things that they say, right? just naturally how we even it makes me think about like children. I was talking to someone the other day over there, like, what can I do as like a father? And I was just like, you're raising white kids. And the first thing you can do is you can buy your children, books that include people that don't look like them. And there are so many books out there now that really celebrate the life and culture of Black people, because we didn't have that. I didn't have that growing up. And so there's been this new wave of education and books that really allows children to see themselves in these books. And it'd be great for white children to be raised in a world where they see more than just white people. And so that'll fight against like seeing others as dangerous. I grew up playing with Barbie dolls, and I had a Black Barbie doll and I had a white Barbie doll too. And like, it was just very natural for me to like see people together, because that's how my parents raised me. And so like, I like, children are taught to be racist. And so like, that's just really important that we understand like what we choose to put in front of children and what we choose not to put in front of children have an impact on how people are raised and their views and their mindsets in this country. And it's like important, and it starts very, very early. And so, it's a difficult concept for white people to understand that like your silence is racist, right? There's a video of a white racist activist or activist against racism, and she says, I think it's Jane Elliott, I think her name is. She like is in an auditorium full of like white people, and she asks, raise your hand if you would like to be treated how Black people are treated in this country, and no one rose their hand. And then everyone, she was like, maybe you didn't understand me. I need you to like raise your hand and like say if you would like to be treated, if you would be okay with being treated the way that Black people are treated in this country. No one raised their hand again. And she was like, so this tells me two things. One, you're well aware of how Black people are treated differently in this country, because by not raising your hand, you understand, you're saying you don't want to be treated like them. And number two, you don't want to be treated like them. So you know that it's wrong. And so the fact that that's the case. If you ask any white person, most white people in this country, any white person, if they would like to be treated the way that Black people are treated in this country, they're going to tell you no. And the fact that like that's the case, and that you continuously turn your eye away from the way how wrong it is of all of these stories that you hear in the news, and you want to make an excuse for why that person deserves to be treated that way, that is unacceptable. But it's nice now. I'm like, yep, you finally arrived. Great, that's amazing. Wish we would have arrived here a lot sooner. And still, what my eyes are and what my heart is like, this is all great for all the protests and everything to start happening. But we also have to realize like the person that is in power right now has a direct impact on the way that this country is led. And I'm just waiting for November to see what's going to happen, because I feel like all these protests and things will be for naught if we don't make a change in terms of our leadership and how we are being led, because, ultimately, some of the most racist people in this country feel empowered and feel like they have a leg to stand on because of who is leading our country.
Yeah, this is obviously a dangerous area, and I want to be a little bit careful with the way that we talk about this. But I mean, essentially, I actually think that someone like Donald Trump being in power is more reflective of what's going on, rather than necessarily like, top down, how much power does someone like Donald Trump have in terms of the way that police union contracts are, structured, and the way that departments are able to just kind of like push off reforms or things like that. I mean, and you dig into some of the other crazier stuff that happens. You mentioned the movie 13th, which I haven't actually seen, but you start digging into some of the stuff about the way that prisons function, and it's like, okay, well, we have all these prisons which are incarcerating some unbelievable percentage of Black men that are located in largely rural areas throughout the country, and felons are often not allowed to vote. So what ends up happening is you have prisons that are sort of taking the population of Black men from the city, putting them in the country, the rural areas of the country, counting them as people in the census in that area. So that area gets more actual like voting power, but those people are not allowed to vote, right? So the sort of like bizarre gerrymandering that occurs based upon prison populations actually further empowers people on the right in rural areas to have more say in the politics of what's going on, right? And just like stuff like that is just so mind-blowing when you really start digging into it. It's like, how is this actually possible that this has occurred? And it's the ability for institutions to just be like rotted and to either passively or purposefully implement policies that end up creating these really just racist outcomes is shocking, right? And it's one of those things where if you know the example that you gave of the activist, right? Like if you just kind of squint and think like, okay, would I like to be treated like a black person in this country? Like the answer is obviously no, right? And then if you start to dig in a little bit more, it's a lot more complicated than you first think, right? You really start to break apart. Okay, what are all the exact statistics on policing and racial crime and all that stuff. And it's kind of messy. You're like, oh, this isn't a clear story. But as you learn more and more and more, it's like, oh, that first squint response is actually the right response, right? It's messy, but like, if you learn enough, it seems complicated. And then if you learn more, you're like, this is crazy.
Yeah, I guess that's the push, is that people just need to learn, right? And I think that like there's been like a level of apathy, again, to be able to like step away, and a privilege to be able to say like, I don't have to learn about that because that's not happening to me. And, I think that's the first place to start. It's like, it's not that it's not happening to you, it's that it's wrong and it's happening to other people. And, as a human being, I respect everyone. And I want everyone to be able to be able to live freely and to be able to have choice and to be able to feel safe. I mean, there's so much, like, we're a community and we have to live together and we have to coexist. But it's not just about like your experience, it's about others, and to actively be to be against oppression in any shape or form is super important. And so, as messy as the story is, it's really important that you learn about the mess and make a decision for yourself. And I feel like that's what people have opted out of for so long. And so it's nice to have so many people interested in learning more about what they can do. And the first thing is like educate yourself around like how the system is designed so that you can make informed decisions on really how to support people of color, but mainly the Black community.
And one other thing that I think is really important to touch on here, and again, this is a little bit of a dangerous topic, but I think it's really worth digging into, is just this idea of quote unquote cancel culture, right? That people, particularly on social media and certain areas of the internet, are just really, really worried about saying the wrong thing and getting in a lot of trouble, right? And this is something that, I've seen in online communities for, probably close to 2 decades at this point, right? Where you end up with a group of people who are very ideologically similar, have very similar beliefs, and then it ends up being this kind of weird self-policing. And the phrase that people often use is like the left eats its own, right? Where if you don't speak in the exactly correct codified academic language, you're in a lot of trouble with people who are very close to you on the ideological spectrum. And for people who aren't deeply immersed in those worlds and understanding what's going on, they may not be aware of the issues surrounding the trans community with LGBTQ rights and things like that. And they just see people kind of freaking out online, like, attacking each other. And they see prominent celebrities who said something that was off color, but maybe not quite, like obviously racist or whatever, getting in a lot of trouble, and they just get scared and they're ashamed and they don't know what to do. And based upon our discussion of feedback earlier, I see a lot of this stuff as potentially counterproductive and having unintended consequences. But in the big picture, is this that big of a deal? So I'd just be curious to get your take on, what do you think of all that stuff, and how can people who are just starting to kind of come into this, an awareness of this stuff, navigate that dangerous landscape?
Yeah. I guess like what's difficult is that like, the cancel culture is so unforgiving, right?
Yeah.
And I think what's interesting is that what people don't recognize is that the technology and the things that we are exposed to allows people to get, the new. I've always said that the new liquid courage is technology.
Yeah.
People can hide behind their words and just be as nasty as they want to be when someone does something that is against what they believe. And that kind of has like an opposite effect, right? It really isolates people and doesn't allow them to learn and to be better. And I think that, ultimately we need to provide grace when someone says something and then recognizes that they say something incorrectly and come back and try to fix it. I know. I think personally, like this, like really speaks to like the whole CrossFit situation recently. Super different. Like, do I forgive Greg Glassman for the things that he said as he tries to come back and he writes an apology, and then we figure out more and more that has come out, and like the way that CrossFit headquarters or CrossFit HQ has been operating and navigating? Can I forgive that of someone? And I don't know. I don't know if I can. And so, do I cancel him? Do I like stop following? And yeah, at the moment for right now, because I can't, like, it's a matter of like self-preservation. And it's like, again, seeing that and providing resources, my personal financial resources, my energy towards someone, and something as big as CrossFit, that has brought me so much joy in the past few years. And, as I've developed, provided the structure that I need to be successful, like it's difficult to continue to engage with places that things that fundamentally don't respect who you are. And so I understand the cancel culture. I mean, I get it. Do I think it's the best thing to like move us in a direction that's going to be more inclusive and understanding of across lines of difference? Not in every case, but I do understand it, and have participated in saying, nope, I'm not going to be engaging. Like I said earlier, I did a whole sweep and clean of like my friendships and relationships with folks back in 2016, and have been forced to do so again in this current climate of like, hey, if you can't see the fundamental issues here, and how it impacts me as an individual, you don't understand me. And so I don't want to see your content. I don't want to engage and provide you a platform to be more oppressive. And so, I mean, again, I don't think it's the best thing, but I think I do understand it.
Yeah, I think that, you started to touch on this a little bit, but there's a huge difference between sort of like a pattern of behavior or something showing like deep institutional rot compared to someone potentially just saying the wrong thing or misusing a word or just not really recognizing that there's like a deeper issue at play, and then, making a sincere apology and attempting to learn from it. Right. So to use the CrossFit example, some folks are like, well, it's just one tweet, it may or may not actually be racist. It seems like he's maybe more promoting conspiracy theories. Like, I don't really know what's going on. It's clearly messed up, but I don't know if it's fair to, destroy this organization based upon that. But to your point, it's like, okay, well, yeah, this is one tweet and you can argue about that, but more and more information comes out and you realize, this is a thing that has been going on for a while in a lot of different levels. And the people who are speaking out and who are quote unquote canceling Greg are often doing it from a point of deep frustration with his behavior over a long time, where they're like, we've tried to work on this internally. We tried to talk about this. We tried to do something. We tried to change, steer the ship of the organization from inside, and it's just not happening. Right. And, you hate to play armchair psychologist, but it's like, this man is obviously suffering from a personality disorder and is just kind of like out there doing crazy inflammatory stuff all the time.
Yeah.
And, at some point, someone like that, what are you going to do other than cancel them?
They have to go. They have to go. Right. Like, to a degree, I mean, it's very similar to like if a president does something crazy, and jeopardizes their leadership, what do? I mean, and jeopardizes the livelihood of so many people across a country. Like, what do? You gotta get rid of them. We've seen that in the past, and so I think that that stands true here. I think it's just so much, there's such a laser focus on it because so much of these people's platform is now online, and so many people have access to them personally, through their Instagrams, through their Facebooks, whatever platform it is. And so I think that creates a heightened level of cancel culture, whereas, what we used to rely on was the newspapers and the news on TV and things like that. But there's so much more exposure and there's so much more access to so many different people that it really requires so much more of leaders. And really, once they are exposed, it's like, oh, there has been a trend of this, and you don't respect these people, you don't respect these different communities, and so what do? It was they cancel them, and like I said, I totally understand that. And this institutional rot you speak of, that, and that's what has been the most shocking to me as a CrossFitter, who's someone who considers himself to be a CrossFitter. You've coached me. I've been in this sport for a minute, and to think that for so many years I was contributing to that institutional route with my money, with my brand and who I am is, a little discomforting. It's like supremely discomforting. Because I absolutely love CrossFit. Selfishly, I love what it's been able to do for my body as an athlete. I love the communities that I've been a part of, the people that I've met because of it. I met you because of CrossFit. John, who's still continuously, coaching me on the side from time to time. It's competing and the friends and all of the other things. It's like there's so much positive that has come from it. But there's also this toggle between, it's like, man, I've been supporting this and these people don't support me. And that was like a big lesson that I learned, very young. My dad always used to say, you do a lot for other people, but you also need to be thinking about how much those people are doing for you. Are they supporting you? And do they truly understand who you are and what you're about? And if they don't, you need to really evaluate why you're giving so much or why they are part of your life. And so that's the struggle that I've had in the last week or so with the whole CrossFit situation and Greg Glassman.
Yeah, I think that's really insightful. Just the emotional toll on you of saying, hey, this was part of my identity for a while. And, it's sort of like, oh, maybe this is sort of like a one-sided relationship. Like I'm putting a lot into this and hanging a lot of myself onto this specific entity in this term, and to find out what's going on behind the scenes is just, sickening.
Yeah, because I've brought so many people to the sport. So many people have just wondered, hey, you've changed a lot. This, how are you? We just think about fitness in general. Fitness and so people's health are always at the forefront of a lot of people's minds. And my health and fitness has changed drastically because of CrossFit, from the skinny, 120-pound individual that I was. Before.
Were you really 120 pounds when you started CrossFit?
Not when I started CrossFit. When I started CrossFit, I was about 175, 180, and I literally gained 20 pounds in a matter of a 3-month summer. It was crazy. But yeah, people who knew me in high school, I was small, skinny, and then for those people to see me now, they're like, "What have you been doing? What is that?" And then so many of those people have come back and said, "Hey, I've been starting CrossFit, or I want to start CrossFit, and this is what I'm doing." And to be able to be like a health coach on the side to so many people, having learned so much about dieting and just nutrition and what it takes to be, fit, has come from CrossFit. And the number of people I've brought to the sport and the number of people that have been impacted by the sport because of my involvement is, countless. And so, then to think about this now, it's like, wow, I brought so many people to this thing and I've been supporting it. And you talked about the emotional toll. It's like this level of guilt. And it's like, well, what am I going to do now? I love to still CrossFit. I love throwing a barbell over my head, and being able to do things that seem at the time impossible. what was my fitness going to look like going forward, which is a difficult thing about too. So yeah, it's just been such a shock, so much in this past week, to see that happening.
Yeah, I'd love to dig into that a little bit more too. And so, I mean, this is not by any means a perfect analogy or even a good analogy, but you take someone like James Watson, who was one of the discoverers of the helical structure of DNA, right? Made one of the most important contributions to science of all time. And this dude is not like a maybe slightly problematic, sometimes says some questionable stuff racist. This is like an active, overt racist, right? And it's like, okay, well, what do we do with James Watson, right? We have this guy who, changed science and made an unbelievable contribution, but other than that, he's sort of like an abhorrent person. How do we actually reconcile that with what we do in the future? And, not to say that Greg Glassman is the same thing at all, right? It's not like CrossFit is on the same level of discovering the structure of DNA or anything like that. But it's like, okay, how do we potentially separate what someone created and put into the world from their actions as an individual? And I'm curious what your thoughts are on that and how you attempt to reconcile that.
Yeah, I mean, I've been reconciling that for a while. I mean, we see it all the time. People who have this like massive platform and are contributing in a way, specifically like artists, right? We think about this like with musicians. Yeah, there's always absolutely this opportunity where like this person puts out great music. This person is incredible. We think about like Michael Jackson. We think about, how this person, like R. Kelly, like their impact on music and musicianship in so many different communities is so expansive. And then to find out like, individually, personally, they were, not the best people. And so I don't think it takes the place of, I don't think that like what they created is now like any, like not worth still valuing. Like, people still will dance to a Michael Jackson song. We can't negate the fact that this man had such an impact on so many different communities, used to sell out football stadiums, people fainting to see him. His music is still beautiful, and his talent, is God-given, and I think that like, the sport of CrossFit, to bring it back to CrossFit, is like CrossFit as a sport is still an amazing sport. It still can have the positive impact. We probably need to rebrand it. But like it can still have the impact that it was intended to have or is intended to have on people's lives and their fitness. It can still have that impact. So while I'm not at a CrossFit gym doing a CrossFit workout, I'm not going to be going to any gym that is affiliated with CrossFit. That's my personal decision. I still do CrossFit style workouts. I've been doing them for the past 2.5 months on my roof, with the one dumbbell and some bands that I have, right? And so I think that in this case, we have to separate. People always have to separate the art or the creation from the person. And I think the more that we do that, the less shocked I'm not less shocked, but like the more we'll be able to reconcile, like still engaging in something that is bringing some level of satisfaction, fulfillment, improvement to or enhancement to our lives, without feeling guilty. And I think that's that's the space that I've been living in the last couple of days of like, I can still work out in this way and not contribute to, the organization as a whole.
Yeah. And I think another layer to that, you mentioned music, art, discuss science, probably a lot of similar stuff in business where we have, not necessarily a causal relationship, but probably a correlative relationship between problematic behavior and innovation, right? Where it's like, okay, if you have someone who is willing to totally go against the grain, to buck the trend, to stick to their guns, to have some sort of like crazy radical idea and just sort of disregard everyone telling them that it's stupid and just like push forward over and over and over again to actually make some sort of large contribution like that, I would not be surprised at all if that correlates with, a tendency towards predatory sexual behavior, if it correlates with a tendency toward, holding like offensive non-consensus opinions. And it, the pool of innovators is probably has a disproportionate number of people who have some form of disordered personality who are going to do like really awful stuff in their personal lives.
Absolutely.
And that's tough.
I mean, that's what makes like some of these, like, they talk about people who are like so brilliant and so smart, and it's like, they are like literally so rare, and their ability, that their brain works in such a unique way that it can create something that has never been seen before. There's this manic kind of like, this manic kind of, I guess, expression that they have, that then one way they are so polarizingly positive and can fulfill and impact so many people. But I mean, there's also the opposite end of that. It's like, yeah, there's probably something wrong with them that they can. It doesn't always have to be that way, but a lot of the time, because of the light that those people are able to create, and I guess the public nature of what the light that they're put in, it really has a like a deep impact on their development as a human being, and oftentimes because they are so they're so enveloped in the world that they are in and the world that they're creating and things that they're creating for other people. A lot of the time, like the mental health of what they need, support and development of what they need, is often overlooked, and continues to fester in a way that causes them to do something really negative and not be held accountable until it's exposed. So it's sad to see, but also like it kind of makes sense.
Yeah, something you said there made me think about, we can use the Greg Glassman example again, where one of his longtime employees wrote, a piece called In Defense of Greg Glassman, and it showed all these, really like very generous and seemingly wonderful things that Greg has done over the years, with his money, making, unbelievable donations to people and taking like a very inclusive and charitable look towards the world, which to me, at some level, it's like that could be surprising at first, but to me, it seems like the trait there is self-righteousness, right? That if you're an extremely self-righteous individual who's kind of immune to feedback from the outside world, that you'll tend to do things that are both extremely charitable and giving because you sort of impulsively think it's the right thing, and you'll also do things that are just like unbelievably messed up and polarizing and potentially negative for the world because you impulsively believe it's the right thing. Because the defining trait is self-righteousness, not good or bad.
Right. And when you don't have some kind of check on that moral compass of where that is, it's like that's when you really see the best and the worst of people. I can't say it any better.
Well, there we go. Fine compliments from an education maestro.
I wouldn't go maestro. I wouldn't go that far, but I got a little bit of something, I guess.
Yeah. Wayne, this has been great. We've tried to unpack some really difficult topics, and on social media, talking about a lot of this stuff is very, very dangerous because people sort of come in with a preconceived notion and are quick to attack. And I think that a podcast format is hopefully better for that because you can actually start to pick things apart and have a charitable conversation and figure out what's actually going on and what people think and try to unpack the ideas. So, I mean, thanks so much for agreeing to do this and for being so willing to share about your experiences and your thoughts on this.
Thanks again. Thanks. This has been a pleasure to share. I feel really honored that you reached out, and feel really proud to call you, to have called you a coach at one point. Also, call you a friend and an ally, Todd. I really appreciate how you're using this platform to inform and educate others, and I hope that. I know that a lot of good will continue to come from it. So kudos to you, and God bless you. Seriously.
Thanks, Wayne. If people want to learn more about either you or KIPP or anything, do you have something you'd like them to do? Would you like to send them anywhere?
Yeah, I mean, they can reach out to me directly. My Instagram or my personal email. They seriously can reach out. I have tons of resources for people. I don't know how you want to share that, but happy to have folks to reach out personally.
Yeah. I mean, I'll put everything in the show notes, but if there's a particular thing you want them to do, go ahead and mention it.
You can reach out to me on my Instagram, Banksy Lifts, BANKSYLIFTS. Banksy Lifts is my Instagram handle, and happy to talk to you there and send you some resources, and send you to people who probably can speak to this better than me. I'm a pretty intense reader, so my first place is books. So I will send you to a lot of places, a lot of things that you can do and read. But yeah, absolutely.
Thanks for listening. If you like the show, the best thing to do would be to send it to one of your friends who also likes podcasts. If you want more, I have an email list where I send out a weekly update with all the podcasts I've recorded and articles that I've written. I also include my favorite things that I've been reading or listening to as well. You can sign up for that at www.toddneve.com. That's I before E, or you can open up the show notes in your podcast player and click the link in there.